Welcome back, everybody, to the Coptimizer podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Flanley, and I'm excited for today's show. If you have not heard of TaserCon, you are going to hear about TaserCon. And if you don't know the brainchild behind TaserCon, you're going to get to know the brainchild here in just a moment. So without further ado, I'm excited to bring on our guest today, Andy Wrenn from Axon, and we're going to have a great discussion about the whole officer.
Hey, Pat, how's it going?
It's going great. It's going great. Thanks for spending some of your valuable time with us. We really appreciate it. For our audience, let's just jump right in and maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, Andy, and your background in law enforcement, and then how you kind of wound up where you are today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Super pumped to be on the show and talking to you, and really excited about what you're doing. I started my public safety journey pretty young, about 17 years old. I entered the volunteer fire service and spent about 7 years there between the end of high school and college. And as you can imagine, through those experiences, worked with a lot of cops. And I remember the first police ride along that I went on with a sheriff's deputy named Joe Sipe in Guilford County, North Carolina, and who ended up being one of my mentors in life. And Joe, I remember that first night riding in the town of Summerfield in a sheriff's deputy's car and just thinking, man, this has got to be the best job in the world. And I love the fire service, but the idea of like going out into the world and solving problems, and they giving you kind of a car and a radio and a gun and a badge and all these things, as a kid, those things are just amazing. They're like really big ideas, right, to understand and process. And of course, I'm a kid who grew up watching, Dukes of Hazzard and Knight Rider and, things like that. And so Cops and Robbers and that kind of stuff. But yeah, started in the fire service, spent a lot of time there, loved that journey, and got to do amazing things. And then when I got old enough, I started figuring out like where I wanted to work. I as any young person, probably in policing, who's fascinated by movie and TV and films and things, LAPD was always one of the things, right?
Yeah, you're bringing it up now, so I got to ask, what's the best cop movie ever made?
Ooh, great question. That's a tough one. Where I got my fascination from LAPD was watching Lethal Weapon as a young guy, and I just thought it was the coolest thing. Yeah, seeing those two, Mel Gibson, Danny Glover, working together, and so as kind of I think where that LAPD journey started for me, but I didn't land there. I knew that was really cool for a lot of reasons, but I wanted to stay somewhat local to the East Coast, very connected to my family. And so my experience in trying to figure out where I wanted to be was just in the bigger agencies in the Southeast. And since I was a Carolina kid, Charlotte naturally was an agency that was top of my list. Big agency, lots of different jobs, and just very well resourced. So I started my policing career in Charlotte in 1999 at 23 years old.
Wow. So do I ask Duke or Carolina?
Oh, good question. Or
both or neither.
Yeah. Well, my family with cousins, and we have a big family on my dad's side. A lot of folks went to Carolina, and some folks went to Duke. So I would say definitely a Carolina kid. Grew up watching Tar Heels play. Matter of fact, I remember watching Michael Jordan play at Carolina. Went to Campbell University basketball camp a couple of years in a row as a kid, and got to meet some college stars and things. And so definitely a Carolina fan growing up.
All right. Well, being a Purdue guy myself, I am, anytime we start talking about Duke and North Carolina, I have flashbacks back to 1994. Purdue makes it to the Sweet 16. We play Kansas. We beat Kansas. We advance to the Elite Eight. I wind up with courtside seats, and I watch Purdue. I want to say we take an 11-point lead going into the half. This is when we had Glenn Robinson, Konza Martin, Matt Painter. and then the second half didn't go so well for us. And
Yeah.
so I'm yeah, I know there's a lot of Duke fans, and one of my good friends, he's a Purdue guy through and through, and his son is just starting his freshman year at Duke. He's wrestling at Duke, so he's like, I'll be a Duke wrestling fan, and he's wearing the
Absolutely.
colors. But anyway,
Yeah.
I hate to get us sidetracked, but people want to know these things. If you're from North Carolina, it's one or the other, really. So you wind up at Charlotte Mecklenburg PD in 1999, and
Yeah.
what was that experience like?
My dad's a Marine. My granddaddy was a two-star in the Army, two-star general in the Army. My great uncle Runt was a Marine Corps aviator and into World War II in the Korean War, and so come from a big military family. So I was always drawn to that paramilitary structure, and so policing for me was. I was excited to go to the academy to learn how to march and get in formation and make sure my uniform was squared away and my gig line was straight and my shoes were polished. And so I just immediately was drawn to that structure in the academy experience. And for us in CMPD, we have our own police academy. It's not like a barracks situation. We don't live at the academy, but you're there certainly Monday through Friday, 7 to 5 or 6 p.m. and you're going through a very structured 19, 20 weeks of training for sure. So that was amazing. I mean, we started our academy at 52. We graduated, I think, 43 folks. We started the first CMPD guide on program. So we're the first recruit class to come through carrying marching with a guide on. And that was at the lead of our president of our class, Craig Skasha, who's a former Marine. And just had an amazing experience, built these lifelong relationships with people in the academy, as you do in a lot of those academy experiences. And a lot of those guys and girls are in leadership at CMPD now and doing very well. But yeah, came out of the academy, obviously went immediately into field training. We do a 3-month rotation in field training here in Charlotte, and off into the road I went out for third shift was my first assignment. My body did not do well on third. So as soon as we got a new recruit class out that followed us, I was able to get to second shift and sleep again. And we're lucky. I would say like one of the fewer agencies that don't rotate days and nights. We have a fixed schedule. You have a fixed days off and you don't rotate back and forth to days or nights, which is, I know, a real burden on people's bodies over a 20, 30-year career.
Yeah.
So yeah. That's where
there's a lot of research on that. Now, I will tell you, I did the exact opposite. Of course, I went into the military right out of high school before I came back to Purdue. But so I was a little bit older when I started on the PD, and when I started on the street, I went right to nights, and I loved the work. And I was a little geared toward night anyway. I'm more of a night owl. I'm not a lark, but I spent about my first 14 years either on the midnight shift, or I think 2 of those years were the second shift, the afternoon shift. But yeah, there's definitely if you're the type of person that can manage staying up all night. Some people physiologically, their circadian rhythms are just not matched well. So you see things like increased number of minor traffic accidents, some decision-making issues. But and I only bring this up because I think this will be maybe a good precursor to the discussion that we're going to have about training and really about treating the officer as a whole officer, and understanding that most of the world doesn't stay up at night. There's several professions that have people that stay up all night. But most of the world doesn't. And most of the world doesn't ask the person that's staying up all night to also make life and death decisions in very stressful situations. So preparing and training and treating the whole person, I think, is very, very important. So I always find it fascinating because a lot of people they really just can't. The nights, they just know it. They know, hey, this is not for me. And I think one of the things we'll talk about later too are divorce rates. And if you ask, I think if you ask me, a lot of that has to do with the shift work and just the burden that it puts not just on the officer, but the officer's family. I mean, that's tough.
Yeah, it is a real burden, and I think even internally in the profession, we don't even recognize it a lot of times. I think like as we get into wellness, like it's starting to come around. You're starting to see agencies directing resources there, but we still have such a long way to go.
Well, and that the straight shifts, some of the early research, because back in the late '90s, there was not a lot of research. There was some research coming out of Washington State on the impact of sleep, tired cops. Professor Vila, if you've ever seen his work, he's kind of one of the first people that really started to hit on this area. But it's one thing to know it; it's another thing to do something about it. And when you're talking old paradigms and the way you have departments set up for their shifts, saying, hey, look, we're going to go from a rotating 8-hour swing shift to a 9 and 3 or a 10-hour shift or a 12-hour shift. Everything's a trade-off, but the straight shifts in terms of what the research shows are the best in terms of managing health.
Yeah.
Still have to have people stay up all night though.
Yeah. And I think like our profession, which we love and are very proud of, is a bit cyclical in that way. And a lot of times we do things because it's the way they've always been done, instead of thinking about, if you're an agency that's rotating days and nights and you're an executive that leads that agency, what benefit do you actually get from your talent by doing that? Because if the talent's got to be the most important resource for you, because A, it's where you spend just about all your money, but B, if your people are not resourced and essentially prepared to do the work in the community the best that they can be, that's where your highest risk is, right? The highest risk is in those use of force environments, that training liability, failure to train claims, like that area is where you've got the most risk and liability. And so it's just interesting that our profession, just as a whole, hasn't prioritized the wellness until just recently. We're starting to see some of these trends.
Well, and I think in large part, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, it's because we're being forced to. We didn't make the changes when we knew we should have. And like a lot of things, we broke some stuff and now it's time to fix it. And look, this generation, for as much as people want to malign the millennials, they're a very bright, very hardworking group of people that also have figured it out.
Yeah.
And they have options. Let's be honest, they have options. And if you're not setting your agency up in a position where you're going to be able to provide the right resources for your officers, number one, they won't come. And I think we're seeing that in anywhere from, just in the number of applications and the number of people coming into the profession. But number two, they're not going to stay. They'll either leave the profession or they'll go to another agency. And I just read another article yesterday here, an agency in Indiana is paying a $10,000 bonus for lateral transfers. And
yeah.
So the cannibalization started a few years ago, and it's hitting a sickening pace right now. But
it really is. So this is a new thing that exists, right? Our research suggests that recruiting is down 30-40% across the country. One of our senior master instructors and training advisory board members, Leroy Outlaws from Seattle, he tells us that they're supposed to be in the 1,400 sworn range. They're down to 9. He said they're going to see before the end of the year, probably down to 700 cops. They're pulling detectives out of their seats to answer 911 calls. Like, these are real issues that actually negatively impact the community. And Seattle's one of those, I would say, it's one of the ones that got really affected by the defund movement, and it's unfortunate. It's as reality is, as you know, all this impacts the community directly, and so that's a real, I would say, communities should be concerned about that, and that's I think it doesn't happen quite as aggressive as Seattle across the country, but even CMPD at my agency, we used to have 3,000 people in line to be a police officer in that kind of recruiting process. And I think we're nowhere near that number. And matter of fact, Major Ryan Butler, who's over our academy training, recruitment, the whole thing, he's got his teams going all over the country and visiting different conferences and recruiting police officers in that lateral pay. And it's the best we've ever seen it at CMPD. But that tells you how much they're trying to continue to source their human pipeline.
Yeah, and I also read an article just this week, the first time where I've seen it publicly stated. I know that there are agencies that have been making these decisions for a long time, but it's not a very popular thing to say, so people don't say it publicly, but they are literally canceling shifts, and they've let the public know that because of a critical Manning shortage, we do not have officers available to work during this period of time during the day. So they're having to contract or work with other agencies. I think they said the state police to come in and handle emergency calls during the day. And then any non-emergency calls, they said when they do staff, they'll stack the calls. And if they have time, they'll get to them. And that, the writing's been on the wall, and we knew it was coming, but it really, I think, emphasizes the need to not only recruit and retain the highest quality talent, but also we have to find ways to drive maximum value from them while we have them, and do it in a way that makes it enjoyable to come to work, because policing it's not all sunshine and rainbows. It's a lot of fun when you're doing it, but it also can wear on your soul when you're out there every day dealing with people that are in crisis, and that's not just once or twice a day, especially for those that work in the larger metropolitan areas, right? You're going from call to call where people are in crisis, whether it's mental illness, whether it's addiction issues, domestic violence, homelessness, and all of the those kind of crimes of despair that come with those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I continue to believe that policing is one of the best jobs in the world, and I did not leave for Axon because I was unhappy or dissatisfied. My reality was I just had an opportunity and I took a risk. But I remember, and I would say this is a recruiting pitch. Like, we need especially young men and women to come into the profession and serve their communities, and it gives more back than it takes, 100%. And I know we as the more time you spend in policing, the maybe less you believe that at some point in time in your career. But the reality is, you leave a policing career, and I left. I didn't retire, but I left early, and still am just hyper proud of what I was able to be a part of and accomplish, and the teams that I worked on, and the phenomenal talent that I was surrounded with, on a day-to-day basis. And I heard in another favorite show of mine was The Southland, and I remember this the first episode of that show when this rookie cop on his first, in field training, his first night out, he shoots and kills a guy justifiably, and his field training officer said, "This is policing. You gotta get back up and focus on the next thing." He says, "This is the front row seat to the best show on earth," and I continue to believe that about policing. It's incredible what you're able to do and be a part of.
Amen to that. It really is, and I think we do have cycles. I think whether it's a downturn in the economy, whatever it might be, but this one concerns me a little bit more than others, just because of the lack of applicants that are really looking to come into the profession. And I've people that have listening to this podcast are probably tired of me saying this, telling the story, but I have new guests on, so I like to say this. But when I was a chief for 10 years, and I used to go back to our academy and teach a class and sit on a panel discussion for new chiefs. I'm sure it's this way in most states, but in Indiana, when you become a new chief, there's a 40-hour course that you have to attend. It's mandated by the state, and in that course, you learn the things. A lot of times, like, what are the resources available to you and your agency? What are the things that you're going to be responsible for as a chief, and those. But it was always an opportunity to sit and have a conversation with new chiefs. And again, most police departments, 80% of police departments in America are 20 officers or less. They're very small.
Yep.
And they get a lot of turnover. The average tenure for a chief in the United States is about 3 years. And it seems pretty short, but when you think that chiefs often, run on political cycles, it makes a little bit more sense. When you have a new mayor comes in, they bring a chief with them. 4 years later, if they get voted out, that person's bringing in someone else. So, long way of saying, I started asking the question in the aftermath of the Ferguson issue, and I would ask the chiefs in the room, raise your hand if you are or would actively encourage your child, your loved one, or someone that you know to enter this profession. And no hands were going up. Every once in a while, you would get a hand that would go up. And then conversely, you ask the question, well, if you're not going to encourage them, how many of you are actively discouraging your children or loved ones to enter this profession? And almost every hand goes up. That's a problem, right? So, yeah. And I think we're seeing some of the ramifications of that type of mindset, in that if we're not going to advocate for the profession from the inside, I don't know why we would expect anyone from the outside to advocate for us. And it is a noble profession, and I'm worried about the areas where they're not going to have enough police officers, because in the end, what that does is it creates more pressure on the existing staff that you have. And now with that existing staff, the calls for service aren't changing. The demands for service, even in communities that are demanding the defunding of the police, if their calls going into the police department aren't slowing down. So you have this element of society that's at a crossroads where, what's it going to be? And in the end, you have the officer that's left, the guy and gal that's got to go out and handle the call at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock at night, in the morning, at whatever time of day. And there's fewer and fewer of them there, and they're left kind of holding the bag. That's a lot of pressure.
It is. The irony for me in this defund movement is I would say, the whole circle of life when it comes to policing. So a police officer does something that is either unjustifiable and awesome, like in George Floyd, for example, Derek Chauvin, we make a good arrest on someone who should have never probably been in policing in the first place. And this now affects a random state trooper in Alaska, right? Yeah. Like, literally, because you're a police officer anywhere in the country, it's almost as though you have done, you have committed the crime that was committed to George Floyd. And that is something that we should be holding the public accountable for. It's just unfair. And we know in policing, some agencies are resourced very well, and some are resourced, under-resourced, candidly. And yes. The irony for me, though, is we as a country and a society elect officials to enact legislation. That legislation is enacted, which directly funds or defines police services. And then when you pull things away from police services, it's kind of interesting to me that during the defund part, people were surprised that violent crime rate went up, that there wasn't police service that was being delivered. Like, how in the world did you not know that that was going to happen? Because the reality is, to your point, crime doesn't go away. Matter of fact, pull police services away and you've opened up a ton of opportunity for criminals, right? And so, again, I was just, for me, and this is kind of American politics, I guess you could say, with the fueling the fire by the media, which is, the cops are not doing the right thing and everybody's equal and that kind of stuff is just the furthest thing from the truth. And I think even us, like, even it was hard for me personally just to go through that media burn of policing across the country. So how in the world would you want people to react to that from a recruitment perspective? Who in the hell would want to be close to that profession if that's the reality? But here's what I remind cops. That is not the reality. The reality is your community wants you, needs you, trusts you, and wants to help you. And that is truth. Media is not truth. Media is sales. And as long as you understand media is sales and that fuels politics or vice versa, then you can understand, the profession really does need good talent, great talent. And there's an important job to do here.
And I think that there's the perfect transition, because I don't want this to be all doom and gloom. It'd be easy to get depressed when you start talking about it, but it's also, I think, exciting to see what opportunities can come from these situations, and then really use these tough times as a catalyst for building good times again. So you can kind of like hang your head and say, woe is me, or you can dig your feet in and say, all right, well, what can we do about it? And that's why I was so excited to see what you were doing with TaserCon, because it's one thing to talk about, hey, we should do these things, but it's another to actually back it up and then go do it. And that's where I think going from inaction to action and taking positive steps forward and saying, look, we do have good people in this profession, and it's time we start valuing them, giving them the resources that they need, right? Instead of overtasking and underfunding and under-resourcing them, we can task them appropriately, and we can give them the right resources that we have. Because Axon, I was a long-term partner with Axon, amazing company, great technology. But I in the last 5 years, I found myself having this conversation with a lot of folks at Axon. It's like, look, you can build the best technology in the world, but at the end of that technology, behind all of that great technology, is still a human being and a person that's got to make the decision about how it's going to be used and applied. And if we don't focus on that, then all we're going to have is a body camera that's capturing poor performance, and we're going to blame the officer downstream rather than looking at, well, what we call the fundamental attribution error, right? We blame the person instead of the system in which we're making that person operate. And the system has kind of set us up for failure. And it's time for police leaders and industry leaders to say, look, there is a path forward, and we have the information, we have the ability. Now it's just a matter of having the will to put it in action and go do it.
Yeah, 100%. And you're right. It's not doom or gloom. Matter of fact, the pendulum is swinging the other way. We know that a lot of communities who defunded or even admittedly so in the Midwest, where a lot of that movement started, those towns and cities and communities are like, oh, we've made a huge mistake here. Seeing that violent crime rate go up 400%, that'll do that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I do. That pendulum's coming back the other way, and more agencies are starting to invest in their humans in ways we've never seen before. And so that's a great point for anybody who's kind of fancy about entering the profession. This is coming back to the right place, and I truly believe that we're going to get more resource and support over the next 5 years or so in the profession than we've ever seen before.
So we kind of skipped. We skipped right forward. We went right from being in the squad car to being being at Axon. So, well, let's take a step back and let's just, because you mentioned your academy experience, and that that's a training experience. That's the indoctrination, if you will, into the profession, where we have to learn all of the technical and tactical competencies. You've got to be able to shoot straight, drive, negotiate turns at high speeds, evoc driving, all of those things. But it's done in a pretty structured environment. So did you say how long was your academy that you went through? Because the academy I went through was 14 weeks.
Yeah, we were right around that 19-20 week time frame before you went out to field training.
So, and then you go into a field training experience, and so usually, and this is, I think it's pretty common for most departments that run these types of programs, that you're looking at anywhere from 9 to 14 months that an officer is going to be in training before they're really released to go out and work solo patrol. So, yeah. So at the end of that, even that first year, when you're that first night that you're on your own, right? Or maybe you guys work with partners. Where I worked, we worked by ourselves, and it was solo. And I always felt like, I wasn't young when I started, and I had military police experience. But I'll never forget that first night. That was like, okay, this is real now. I'm out here by myself, and I was very fortunate. I had a great training program. So, what was your first night like? Do you remember it?
I remember my first night, my first call of service, getting punched square in the face by a 120-pound female high on crack, and thinking, what did I just go through? What is happening right now? And on to the fight we were, and I I made a huge tactical error in giving up my kind of awareness, because it was a 120-pound female who was clearly stronger than I was on crack cocaine. And so, yeah, it was eye-opening experience. My first night was, I would say, though, incredible. I was blessed to have phenomenal training officers and senior officers. When I went out to the road, I had senior officers who were every call with me, making sure I was resourced and supported, investing in my learning, not only my tactical learning, but my, administrative learning with, our criminal code and that kind of stuff. And I was very blessed to be at CMPD. And I didn't learn this till later on, until I started teaching across the country. Because when you grow up in an agency starting at 23 years old, you just think that's normal policing and normal resourcing and normal pay and the cars and things like that. And so, not till later on in life we can talk about it, but I really understand how good we had it at CMPD. But yeah, just phenomenal people. I mean, people that are still in my life, like Ken D. Simone's the chief of police at Sandy Springs, Georgia. Very, very dynamic leader, former colonel in the Marine Corps, and just, he was my first training officer at CMPD. So just, people that just continued to invest in me for long periods of time in my policing career. And I just, like, other than being punched in the face as my first call for service, I had a phenomenal first couple of nights out in patrol. It was kind of like, for me, I was so excited to get out there and be on my own. It was kind of like, that first drive that you take after you get your driver's license, right? Like freedom. And we were individual cars. Like we had some double cars that we would ride on. We had domestic violence teams and some different things that we did at the agency. But we had another reason why we were well resourced at the agency. We had backup within a couple of minutes. You had another car with you just about on every call. So we had a pretty good structure there.
Yeah, that's it's such a funny story. It's so true too. And there's a lot of young people coming into the profession today have never been in a physical altercation ever.
Yep.
And so, when you talk about generational differences, this is one of the things that you really have to be aware of, because the first time that they are in a physical confrontation, or maybe even, when you're out on the street, people, they can smell blood in the water, and they know, who everyone's being sized up, but it creates a lot of stress, not just, and I would say not just for the officers, but I can say as an administrator, that was always one of my concerns is, how far can you push somebody in training to prepare them for what they're going to experience without scaring them away from the profession, breaking them, or having an injury or something like that occurs. And I know that's one of the constant struggles that agencies experience to this day. But and it's another reason why this concept of really focusing on training, not just those technical and tactical competencies, but focusing on the individual so they understand what it is that they have to focus on, where their shortcomings are, that they have to really focus on to keep them safe, keep their partner safe, and it's not always just a physical altercation, but yeah. You try to explain that to people in citizens academies and others. It's like they just assume that cops are like Chuck Norris, because where do they get their opinions, right? Same shows you watch, where every once in a while a good guy goes down, but for the most part the good guy always wins at the end. And unless you're watching an edgy movie, it's they do it the right way, and everything all works out.
It's incredible if you think about it. So this is one of the biggest rubs I have with how our communities who elect our officials, and the officials then figure out what resourcing for agencies and that kind of thing looks like. In North Carolina, to be a basic certified barber, you're talking about 1,500, maybe 30 hours or something. To be a basic law enforcement certified officer, you're talking about maybe 650 hours, And so, and of that time, sub 10% of that is use of force critical decision making. So for that, think about that, right? What are we signaling to our communities? We're saying, hey, you're going to get about a third of the time for the officer to go through their certification to actually go in the field and make split-second decisions on police use of force in a matter of seconds, right, or sub-seconds. But we're going to make sure that barbers and hairstylists have more than double the hours to prepare them for their work. And that's controlled at the legislative level. So what does it actually say about us, our communities, from the elected official perspective, and how we're resourcing officers across the country? I think North Carolina is not certainly the rule, but I think across most of the states, at least some of the ones that I've researched, it's about average in that way. Yep. And so I've been to, we train people, about 15,000 people across the globe every year. Here at Axon, and most of that's across our Taser devices. And I've learned a lot by traveling in international markets like Germany, first specifically, and this is across, I would say, most of EMEA. Their officers go to school for 3 years, and it's a bachelor's degree, it's an undergraduate degree, and they come out and their tactics are like our SWAT guys. Their communication skills are like hostage negotiators. It is phenomenal of what they get out of the academy from a work product perspective, because their people are so dang prepared. And in Germany, they have guns, but they don't shoot, they don't shoot near as many people that we do here in the States. And I just think about that, if we ever were to support some kind of national policing reform, that's where it should start. We should start resourcing states to make those academies. Imagine, Pat, if you had a recruit for a year, what you could do,
I can't even. Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought this up, because I did have this discussion previously, and there was a paper that just came out in the last 6 months about Australia, and the Australian model is very similar to that. And there was some discussion about should the U.S. adopt this model. And I'm a big podcast fan. I'm a huge Jocko fan. I was super excited when Axon brought Jocko in. And when I was listening to Jocko on the Joe Rogan show, they were in the aftermath of the George Floyd incident, they were talking about, if you had officers that were trained at the blue belt level in jiu-jitsu, maybe how would that outcome have changed? And literally, like, cities around the country burned in the aftermath of that. We spent billions of dollars in the cost associated with just the crime, the destruction, and that's not even including the cost associated to agencies on staffing and now all the problems that have come with the lack of it. But I was thinking about this, in the special forces, when you are join the military, you really do self-select into these into like the Ranger battalions, the SEAL teams, things like that. And in the policing, it's very similar. After you have a certain amount of time on the job and experience, then you can apply. Most agencies will tell you 2 to 4 years before you're going to get a chance to be on our SWAT team. But it's not done that way in the military or in a lot of these other countries where you will train you like the average, I think, special forces soldier is going to spend 2 years in training before they're ever operationalized for the first time.
Yeah.
And then once they do deploy, they deploy for a period of time, and that's all they do, right? You're just working. You're not working and living at home. Now, granted, the work they're doing is very dangerous, but then they come back from those work cycles and they go into a rest cycle, and then they go into a training evolution, and then they go back out. And I was thinking, man, if we could take the budget that we have, just a fraction of the budget that we spend on the military, and invest in public safety that way in the U.S., then we could eliminate almost everything that we're complaining about. I think a lot of it would go away with the right training and the right resources.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, look, our special operations communities that you're talking about, those guys are training 90% of the time. This is like, just random the numbers, but like a large majority percent of the time, and they're operational a small amount of time. So of course they're going to be unbelievably surgical in what they do. Where law enforcement, it's the complete opposite, right? They're operating in the 90% of the time or more and training less than 10% of the time. And I would say that's generous, right? And so that's why I like to explain things to the public. When people are asking me like, hey, why are cops killing all these people and getting in trouble making these use of force decisions? I'm like, what do you know about how we resource police officers in training? And they don't know anything. They think it's like TV, right? Or they think it's like, hey, SEALs are like arguably the most famous special operations group, but right, it's like, why can't they do like the SEALs and like shoot people so they can save them and blah blah blah, do this and that? And I'm like, it's a world that we know why, and it's just for the communities. We could do that, right? We could be prepared better. That requires you, community, to give more resources to the human beings that are actually doing the work. And so I think that's the rub, right? It's like how much pain is the community willing to live through before they'll actually give up more resources to solve some of these problems? I would say we, hopefully in our lifetime, we'll see this come around where we're going to flip it on its head, and we're actually going to keep people in academies longer and prepare them more on the use of force and the critical decision making and the communication side. Like how many cops get out of the academy were so robotic? Hi, sir, ma'am, I'm officer so-and-so, and I stopped you for speeding, and just like this whole line of things versus like, hey, you're speeding. You okay? You got a medical emergency? But is everything all right? Can I help you with anything? Yeah. Okay. Now that everybody's safe, let's talk about the speeding ticket, right? I just think we can communicate a lot more effectively and be less robotic, but that's how we're training people. Because think about it this way, the 10% we do have with them in use of force training in the police academy, we're teaching them all the ways people are going to try to kill them. So no wonder they come out to the street and they're kind of vectored the way they are in that respect. So,
yeah. It's a lot of self-inflicted wounds. And now, and to say that we're, even if we did that, right, we're still going to have some of these negative outcomes. You're still going to have poor outcomes. because it's humans dealing with other humans, and that's never
right.
going to be it's never going to be perfect. But I can't agree with you more. I think, and I do think that we're on the cusp of beginning to understand that. And part of the problem, and some of that accountability and responsibility has to fall on chiefs and agency heads, because you grow up in an environment where you're trained and it's pounded into you that you're a problem solver. And you know what? No problem is too small. No problem is too large. You give me your problem and I'm going to find a solution for you. May not always be the right one or the best one, but I'm going to find one. And so now you grow up in an environment like that. You become an administrator. You become a leader of an agency. And now it's like, hey, we've got a homeless problem. Okay, well, we'll take care of that. Hey, we've got an addiction problem. Oh, we'll take care of that. Yep, we can fix. And I think for a long time we did that, and we didn't look at that stakeholder model, where if you can imagine that the police department is just a spoke on a wheel, or the handle on the helm of a ship. When you think about that, there's a lot of those handles, and at the core, if you can put the problem at the core, now you get a lot of different stakeholders grabbing onto the helm. We can steer these problems, and everybody can do their part to focus on what's the best way to solve the problem, because and most of the stuff that we are dealing with, it's really not a crime control issue. It's a social disorder issue that there's nobody left to manage the problem except for the police. The public resources just aren't there. So the police, who do you call? And now we're at the point where, well, we're going to call the police, and what we're finding is, because of all of the other problems, now the police might not even answer. And sorry, we're not coming. And now what do you do?
Yeah.
Well, we get mad at the police because I called the police and they're not showing up. And so let's talk about how we fix this. Let's talk about, okay, moving forward. Okay, so let's just, we can find 20 billion to send to Ukraine. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but where's that 20 billion? Let's pull that and let's start training our police officers. But until we get that, all right, what can we do? And
I mean, no matter what side of the aisle you sit on, President Biden, the sitting U.S. president, a few months back said the last thing we need to do is take resources away from police officers. In fact, we need to give more resources to police officers. And so just at the presidential level in the United States, I thought that was a pretty powerful statement. And so, and certainly true, right? And to your point, what you're saying, we're just not, as communities, like forget about the federal level, just at the state and local level, what are we doing to source this, to resource these men and women to do these jobs better and to be more prepared and to be better equipped? And I think it's one that just keeps going round and round and round. And like everybody's crossing their fingers and praying and hoping that they're not going to have the next 3 p.m. news cycle event. But it's going to happen. It does. To your point earlier, humans dealing with humans. And like, look, I continue to take this position that the majority of policing is, like, I think you would agree with me, is reactive in nature. And we were responding for calls for service. And so it's like, who's calling 911? Why are they calling? And what are the police actually needed for? And I'm not saying we shouldn't go. I'm just saying that, we're showing up because we're called, and then something really bad happens. And I would argue, for the most part, the police officer is continuously put in an impossible position, right? To have to defend themselves or the community and take someone's life, or use of force. It's not an easy thing to think about, right? And so, we should at some point in time quit having talks about what happens after a police incident that makes national news where cities burn, and go, hey, what are we doing locally to kind of absolve that? Oh, we're going to do better training. Well, that's undefined. Nobody actually can define what better training means. And, at that political level, that chief to mayor or sheriff to county or like whoever, it seems that there's always this response of like, we need better training. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. Well, okay, if we have a white officer killing a person of color in policing, a lot of agencies respond with, some implicit bias kind of training and things like that. What problem does that actually solve? Are we talking about the ability to prevent bias in police conduct? Like, I think anybody would be for that, but what about the critical decision-making part? What are we doing there? Because that is where most people or most officers are getting jammed up, is the decision to use the force they did at the time. Does it fall in to Graham versus Connor, where this is what was reasonable based on what the officer knew at the time, or was this unreasonable? That's the area we've got to over prepare for, right? That decision making OODA loop, if you will. You were from the military. By the way, happy Veterans Day.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you to your family as well. I was going to come back to that because you said something, and it was going to be an Army story, but we'll come back to that. Yeah. So TaserCon, and I'm going to take your quote right from your website. First of a kind training conference focused on the whole officer, not just on the job, tools, and tactics.
Yeah. I was, when I first came into this role, so my job is head of training, right, for Axon across our globe, and the customers that we serve and support. And the designation of my role is vice president, which just means that Axon own a business unit within the organization. So it just specifically happens to be the business of training. And so when I entered the role, I had spent my first 8 years in sales at the organization and had a blast doing that, architecting Taser and body camera and digital evidence management and in-car camera programs for agencies, and really had a ball doing that. Met some phenomenal people. But with this role, I'd really been away from training for a long period of time. I exited CMPD in 2012, the end of 2012, and started this job. And I was not teaching near as much. I stayed a reserve officer for a number of years. I still am, volunteering at the police department in that, in a general instructor capacity, but I'm not teaching anywhere near what I used to, and I'm not really as connected into that. So I needed to understand, like, what is going on for law enforcement training? What are people attending? Why are they attending? What are they getting back from training and education experiences? And what I didn't see immediately was anything that was specifically targeted to wellness, vitality, and really the resources that law enforcement officers are given, not only to survive their careers, but to survive after their careers. There was a lot of things about guns and knives and handcuffs and batons and how to use all those things. And that's all amazing. And that's all great. And it's all necessary. But, like, what is the other thing? What is the human side? And who is doing that well? And so I didn't really find anything out there that I could say was like a kind of a North Star or guiding light for that. So I started talking to Rick Smith, our CEO, and Josh Isner, our COO, and Luke Larson, who was our president at the time, who were all guys that have been with the company for a long time. And I said, hey, I really want to do this. And I think our customers would love it. And I think we could really start creating some phenomenal dialogue that would result in action. And so, yeah, we stood up the idea of a new training and education experience that we would have at Axon. For anybody that's been to Axon Accelerate, that's a really cool conference, very tech forward. We wanted TaserCon to be the opposite, so very human forward in solving some of the very human problems. And a lot of people ask me, like, hey, it's kind of weird. It's called TaserCon. Are we doing Taser training? Well, no. The origin story at Taser is from Rick Smith and how he was motivated after two of his best friends were killed by gunfire to find a solution for us as human beings to stop killing each other. And that's where the idea of the Taser came from. And so I just wanted to celebrate the way the company started and Rick's leadership. And, growing up as a comic fan and all that stuff, I always wanted to go to Comic-Con. And I'm like, oh, cool. TaserCon sounds like a really cool name. And I think it's one of those things that, ultimately, if we do this well, can create its own little subculture. And so we're pretty excited about it.
Yeah, that's there is a lot that I want to talk about, because you said 2012 you made that transition, so that's the year that I became a chief. So I transitioned from I went from being in a patrol, a SWAT team leader, SWAT commander. Then I transitioned to a narcotics unit, which was an FBI Safe Streets task force and a local task force. And
Yeah.
from there, I went to community outreach. And so, I joke about it a lot of times, like, who wants to make that switch? You're in one of the more uh, operationally fun jobs you can have in a police department. But I was very fortunate early in my career when I was doing some research on trying to understand what the best exercise program for me was going to be to maximize my opportunity to make our SWAT team. And I've told this story a lot, but the very short version of this is I read this book. It was called The Power Diet, and I was doing this like 60% of my calories from carbs, 25 from fat, 15 from protein. And I was running a lot, and I was working midnights, and I I started having this period where I would go to bed about 9 in the morning, and I was waking up at noon, just like ravishingly hungry, like can't go back to sleep. I'm upset, and I'm mad because I got a plan. I'm trying to stick to it. I'm trying to get my training in, and then uh, I find a book called The Zone Diet. I wind up reading this. I literally started weighing and measuring my food. I went from 60, 25, 15 to 40, 30, 30. And uh, within 3 months, I lost 20 pounds. I went from 175 pounds down to 155 pounds. My bench press went from 235 pounds to 295. And my push-ups doubled, my sit-ups doubled. I took almost a minute off my mile splits. And so I tell you all this because I was the guy at the agency that was running around. I was like the guy that found Jesus, right? And I've got this book. I'm like, oh my God, you got to read this. You got to do this. You got to follow this plan. If you do this, you'll be amazed how well you feel. And that led me to just starting doing more research. And so I was just very fortunate early in my career to recognize that, hey, what I'm eating is having a significant impact on what is happening in my performance in the gym. And it also led me to read some of the very early works from Dr. Vila and others, like, well, you know what? Police mortality rates are really, really high. Like, I mean, 20, 25 years a lifespan shorter than the average population, cardiovascular disease going through the roof. I mean, cancer rates, about Alzheimer's, obesity, morbid obesity.
Yeah.
And so that got me, I started these two parallel tracks where I was focusing on wellness and on performance and trying to do the best that I could. And so when I became chief, one of my missions was, okay, well, let's start finding ways to improve health, improve wellness. And, that's an uphill battle, right? That is not an easy thing to do. Even, sometimes even when you have good ideas and good things that you want to bring to your agencies, it's hard to get the buy-in. There's, cops can be suspicious people, right? So they also, are suspicious of what your motivations are. And, and in the end, really all I want you to hire healthy, and I want you to retire healthy and enjoy your retirement. But while, for that time that we have you here at the agency, I also want you to be maximally productive. And I want you to make good decisions, because some of the worst things that I've had to do as a chief were to manage disciplinary procedures and to hold other people accountable for standards that they were well aware of that they didn't meet. So it was always that, internally you struggle with, okay, am I giving enough resources? Are we setting people up for success? Are we setting people up for failure? But I never really found that we had a good holistic solution, and we were piecemealing things together. And so again, that's why I'm so excited when I saw what you were doing. There's a lot of things we could talk about maybe what we did in those last 10 years, but when you have it so you have it laid out, I think, so succinctly. Your three main categories that you're going to focus on in the TaserCon conference are protect life, right? And not just the people that we're dealing with, right? But ourselves, and high performance and social connection. Those three things. And I wanted to take a few minutes. Maybe we can run through some of the categories within those subcategories within those three main things. But I know that's a long way of saying, I think you nailed it.
Well, we'll find out. I think one thing that I hear at Axon we're hyper focused on is voice of customer. And so I don't come into TaserCon thinking we're righteous by any means. Matter of fact, all but like a few sessions are external presenters, people in the field that are experts on these specific sessions. And that's important, right? Because we don't pretend to know it all. And especially on the human side, this is an area we really not invested as a company, just on a platform perspective. So this is what we wanted to nail, and you can only do that well, I think, if you're partnering with a lot of different people. And so, I think first run at TaserCon, I think we're going to give a phenomenal experience. I think we're going to be getting into some real gritty, challenging subjects. We're going to certainly talk about wellness, vitality, police suicide, and burnout, but it's a light at the end of the tunnel kind of experience. That's what we're targeting. We're going to be high energy and fun, and really want people to walk away with not just a piece of knowledge, right? You can go just about anywhere and get that. What I would want from an attendee of TaserCon is they leave with something to implement or do in their agency to make wellness and vitality more of a focused initiative for them. And we're going to talk about use of force. I mean, Taser is still the most used police tool from a use of force perspective in the country. Like, it's used way before anything, especially guns, but OC or pepper spray and batons. And so some of this was like, we felt like we had somewhat of an obligation to connect all these things, because the decision to use a taser and the way that they use the taser is essentially impactful to the success of it, right? If we, Axon, don't build out a curriculum that satisfies, the learning to how to use the taser appropriately or effectively, I should say, then that's on us. The agency has to decide on the policy side, the when, right? That's not our job, but we're certainly happy to lean in there. But this is, all connected back to the taser device. We felt kind of an obligation to connect the human factors part into what we're doing with police use of force related to taser. So we're certainly going to talk about that as well.
And I think we would be remiss if we didn't bring this topic up, since we just talked about, there's, give or take, the police take around 1,000 lives a year, and that's been fairly consistent for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Imagine how high that number would be if Rick Smith didn't have the vision to create the taser and bring that to the market. And I know that, early on, there was a lot of criticism of the taser weapon system. People were worried, is it dangerous? Is it not? And I just can't even imagine right now, I just know from my own agency and the number of deployments that we had. I still remember the very first time that our agency deployed a taser. And it was our SWAT guys that were actually doing the T&E for it. Kind of funny of a story, but I don't know. I just think that's also important to point out that there, people think that policing is broken. Policing's not broken. I tell people policing has never been better. The problem is that the expectations, there's a disconnect between what people expect from policing and what is possible from the way that I think more is certainly possible. And that was always my vision, was always, be a little bit better tomorrow than we were today. Yeah. And the taser, he should have a Nobel Peace Prize for that thing. And I'm not joking when I say that. I mean, it might sound crazy, but I mean, do you guys have a tally somewhere like in Axon headquarters, like live saved by Taser?
We do. It's in the hundreds of thousands. And to your point about Rick, I think what I would want people to know about Rick who had never met him is he's the real deal. He's a young guy. He's in his early 50s. He started this company getting out of business school in his early to mid 20s. And again, because his friends were murdered. And he's at the forefront of our mission every single day. And he's the sweetest guy. He's an incredible visionary, and Rick knows stuff that's coming before any of us even. We're sitting around like, Rick, you're crazy. And sure enough, he sees ahead of things. And so I'm blessed, fortunate, just to continue to be obsessively, after him and want to continue to learn from him. At this level, I get to interact with him more than I ever have. I first met him in 2004 when the company was really, really small, but we've grown quite a bit over the ages, and he's just a guy that is infectious to be around, and he gets up every day with that mission to protect life, and it's kind of like our saying and our main company mission, and I think it's been used so many times we're like, oh, protect life, guys, but it's absolutely what he and many people get up for at this organization every single day, and it's really, really core to what we do. The Taser is it is imperfect, just like any tool, and it's I think the biggest point about the Taser is it's worthless if the human behind it isn't invested in, and so you got to have the human being prepared to use it for it to be effective, and that's the thing that we continue to reinforce here at the company, and that's part of why we're having TaserCon, like, is to highlight the human being that's behind these things. And so, but you're right, hundreds of thousands of lives. Heck, when I ran the program at Charlotte, we have about 2,000 cops in Charlotte, and when I left the program in 2012, excuse me, we had saved 23 lives, 23. And so, that's just CMPD. That's probably a metro of 1.5 million people at the time in the greater Charlotte area. And so those are numbers that, I think agencies should showcase and talk about relative to not only what the Taser has done for their communities from an investment perspective, but what the human beings have done with it. And so, that's a great highlight, Pat. And I would tell agencies that, a lot of agencies report like when they pull the trigger, like we had 50 Taser uses last year, and those are trigger pulls where we're sending darts downrange. But what they're not counting and not reporting are the times that they either pulled the Taser out of the holster and gave commands and got consent, or got people to comply, or laser painting, or any of those things where they're not pulling the trigger. Those are huge wins, because that's what we want. Number one, we actually want the Taser to never be used. We want people to comply with those commands, and it's just a good tool to get compliance.
Yeah, well, I didn't mean to take us on a side path there, but I thought that's definitely worth noting. And so when we look at these three main categories: protect life, higher performance, social connection. Under the protect life, some of the things in the conference you're going to be focusing on are the surviving the first 3 seconds, suicide prevention, because people don't realize that suicide in policing is a huge problem, and there's a lot of reasons for it. It's again high stress, and again, we're not getting the right investments into the officers themselves in terms of sleep maintenance, nutrition education, good physical fitness, good stress management practices, mindfulness and meditation, things like you wouldn't have heard even be mentioned in a police department 10 years ago are now becoming a little bit more mainstream, but we still got a big chunk, I think, to cut into there. But
yeah, I would just say on that, like, it's been horribly tragic, the number of officers that have been killed by gunfire this year. October was especially a very lethal month for the profession, and really, really horrible. Just to talk about it, though, gunfire is not killing cops most. Suicide and heart attacks are killing cops most. And so that is within their career. And certainly in retirement that happens. But we're losing way too many people to those two things in their careers. And the thing about those two is they're absolutely preventable. in most cases, right? And not to, create any negative connotation on the wonderful people and resources in the EAP programs, because I think those are important. But the reality is you're not talking to somebody usually that's been in a patrol car and that's been into a patrol shift and that has seen, dead or burned or the most horrible things you can see happen to human beings. And for me, in a specific incident I had with some PTSD, not till I talked to another police officer did I start to heal from that. And so I think that's like, Axon coaching is one of our programs. I know you're heavily involved in that, Pat. I think that's the beauty of things. We can't force people to go through these robotic systems when they are having emotional distress. And like, just to call it out, if you get in 100% justified police shooting and you take a life tomorrow, you are in a ton of stress. And it's very, very hard to be being put in a police car, them taking your gun, put in an investigator's room or an interrogation room, and being investigated by a homicide detector for justifiable homicide. No matter justifiable or not, you still go through that process. And we don't, and as a profession, go, cool, it's justified. Let's get you, make sure you're good and get you back to normal. It's kind of like, hey, go see the EAP folks and let us know if you need anything. That is not the way forward. That is not the way to continue to invest in people and fix some of these problems. And so I just want to showcase that, this is another area in the profession that we've got to grow and we've got to resource better. And, I don't care if it's Axon coaching or not, agencies really need to start figuring out how to protect the people that serve the communities in these very, very tough, emotionally stressful moments they have to go through on a day-to-day basis sometimes.
Yeah. And, that's a great point because EAP is downstream from where the problem begins. So EAP programs are critically important to any organization because, you're going to get the resources that you need for the people when they need them. However, if you're waiting for EAP to solve your problems, then you have a bigger problem. Yeah. And that's, that was when I learned about what Daniel and his team were doing. It was just, it really aligned perfectly with my mission for what I wanted to do in retirement. And that was let focus on performance, peak performance, and that hire healthy, retire healthy mindset. And that's, it's a bit of a mind shift for a lot of people, just to think that way because, we tend to silo everything. I know it's not just in policing, it's really in life. And it's just, we think that, okay, well, I'll get fit later, when I need to, or I'll sleep more later when I need to, or I'll study for that exam later. And really what we're just lacking, I think sometimes is, for all of our good intentions, sometimes I think we overcommit ourselves and we just don't ever take the time to take a step back to say, okay, what is the best path forward? How do I optimize my day? Not just how do I just not just get through my day, but how do I win my day? Like, how do you win every day? Go out there and I think when we can get people to really adopt that kind of mindset, not only are they going to be happier and healthier, but they're certainly going to be more productive. And I think communities will benefit tremendously from that. And that maybe that's the, when you start putting some of these things together, right? What like the officer wellness and vitality, the leadership, not just organizational leadership. We focus on those things a lot in policing, but we don't necessarily focus on, well, how do I lead myself?
Yeah.
What's my plan for tomorrow?
Yeah, 100%. We were in Las Vegas this summer for our biggest master instructor school that we'd had in company history. We're gonna actually go above that for TaserCon. So we're gonna have a master instructor school that sits within TaserCon as its own kind of learning stack. But one of the things I started thinking about is the why. Why are cops, essentially having so many health problems and mental challenges with regards to depression and burnout? And I think it's always easy to point the finger at, city councils or county councils or chiefs or sheriffs and colonels and whatever and say, hey, you are responsible for this. But it's also, it has to start with us first as individuals. Are you asking for resources? And asking for resources has to be the first step. And so I'll put this slide up, and I'll probably do it again this year. It just says you put yourself last. You put yourself last for 8, 10, 12 hours in your policing shift. You get home, you put yourself last when you get home. And that's the way you live your life for 20 to 30 years. And so no wonder you're not getting the resources and support, because A, you're not asking for them, and B, you're not acting on them. And so I think it's just important to note that we've got to mentally change our own framework about how we think about our own personal success, how we show up every day, how you got motivated to work out. So I went through that myself. I was going through a hard time. I split up with somebody I was engaged to, and I found fitness as my way to kind of get through that. And phenomenal. Once you start investing in your body, phenomenal what changes that you can see, and it benefits everything: mental wellness, physical wellness, strength, endurance. It was cool what I was able to do in that short period of time. But, I would say back to TaserCon, we didn't want it to just be all like suicide and burnout and all that stuff. We wanted to talk about some other things. And so you had mentioned the first 3 seconds. One of the most phenomenal classes I've ever taken. I took it as a police officer. I was actually academy and instructor at the academy. In the North Carolina Highway Patrol actually wrote this, and Robbie Robertson's coming to deliver it at TaserCon. And it's these pre-attack physical indicators that suspects give off before they're getting ready to attack you. One of the most phenomenal courses I've ever been to. So they're coming to do that. And then FBI is coming to talk about it, LEOCA. And if you're not familiar with LEOCA, which is how law enforcement officers are killed, the FBI does a ton of research on not only how law enforcement officers are killed in the line of duty, but also the mindset, the training that bad guys actually invest in before they kill law enforcement officers. And it's disturbing, and the odds are not on our side. So that's just a phenomenal research project that continues to be owned by the FBI, and they do a great job with it. And then Paul Taylor is another example of a very smart guy. He's a professor, University of Colorado, Denver. He's a human factors expert, was a former police officer, and he's coming to talk about how human factors play in use of force critical decision making. We just got some really, really great presenters and people that are just exceptional at their craft coming to invest in this experience.
So you just kind of started to touch on the higher performance aspect of what you're also going to train in. So I know we're actually at the hour. I think we've actually gone over the hour now. So
having a good time.
I know. These things could easily go for hours upon hours, but I want to be respectful of your time and our audience's time as well. The last factor that you talk about in those 3, so you got protect life, higher performance, and the social connection.
Yeah.
And this is, I'm going to give a shout out to Dr. Will Miller. Dr. Will Miller is a comedian. He is a psychologist. He's also a professor, and he's a minister, and he's here in Lafayette. He lives here, but he's also more well known for being on the Bob and Tom show. It's a morning show that's a nationally syndicated morning talk show, and he is really funny. So he's grew up in New York City. He was touring with people like Jerry Seinfeld in that whole genre. Wow. He's a Vietnam veteran, and just has he's just one of the most amazing people that you'll meet, and he's so funny. But it's been now, I think it's got to be more than 10 years ago now, 10, 12 years ago. He's on Purdue's campus, and he has the big one, goes down on the sidewalk, and I believe it was John Watson, a West Lafayette police officer, was driving by, saw it happen. He was right next to a fire station, so they yell over to the fire station. They get an AED over there. They bring him back to life. And so I say all this because he now comes and does presentations for police departments. He's one of our chaplains. He spends a lot of time working with our officers, and he's written a book. His book's called Miserable at Work. It's
that's great.
Very funny. But he really, for the very first day that we hire our officers, we do a swearing in ceremony for them. And then we have a luncheon. We bring their families. We encourage them to bring all their families, anyone, and they're part of that swearing in ceremony. And then we host a luncheon after we do a tour of the police department. And at that luncheon, Dr. Will comes and speaks to them, and he talks. We give them all a copy of Kevin Gilmartin's book, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. And Dr. Will he talks about his journey, and he does it. He's so funny. He does it like a comedian. And he talks about when the lights go out, he was like, there was nobody there. And until he's like, I wasn't going anywhere else. So he's like, I'm not too sure what to think about that. But he's like, he talks about, when he seeing the officer there. But he also talks about the work of Robert Sapolsky, who is a Stanford psychiatrist, psychologist, and they talk about he wrote a book called Why Zebras Don't Have Stress, and Dr. Will tells the story. He's told it a lot, but he's like, police officers, when they go to work, they're in these stressful situations over and over and over and over again. And then they go home and to quote, Kevin Gilmartin, they wind up in the magic chair, right? They go sit in that chair and they sink into that chair, and the rest of the world shuts off. He's like, people in the military don't necessarily do that, because when they're deployed, they're deployed. But, officers every night are deploying and then coming home every night, and coming home every night. But he said it's the way that our brain is wired, and why stress affects us differently from a hormonal perspective and a physiological perspective. He's like, zebras, on the other hand, he's like, zebras can, you get a herd of zebras running around, next thing you know, lion, and he makes the joke, oh, they got Fred, and then now the zebra goes right back. The zebras come right back down to baseline, where humans don't come back down the baseline. Humans stay here, and it takes a while, and oftentimes we come below baseline before we come back up. So that the social connection, and in this other book is called Refrigerator Rights, and that's what got me down this path. But he's like, how many people in your life do you know that can come to your house, open up your front door, walk into your house without knocking, without ringing the doorbell, open up the refrigerator, take out something to eat, and start eating? And he's like, how many people like that are not your direct family do you have in your life that can do that? And I got to thinking about that. I was like, well, nobody does that anymore. Hardly anyone. When I was a kid, that was very, very common. But now, now it's like, it's not like that anymore. And it's a long way of saying the social connection. Life is not just about work. Our work is very important, but there's also things outside of work that are equally as important, that allow you to be the best person you can be at work, but then also allow you to be the best person at home. So I think that's great that you got that's incorporated into this whole concept.
And I think it's about, again, humanizing ourselves in the profession, not as cops, but as human beings who do a job, a very important one. And so, and I would say, like, I've done this in policing. I think you probably did. Most cops have done it or are still doing it. Like, I'm a police officer, you're the community. The reality is we are the community, and the community are us. And so I think that's the distinction, right? Is, it's, I don't even think of it as community engagement. I think of it as just being within the community and talking to people and, knowing people. One of the greatest lessons I got from my field training officers and my senior officers was knowing people's first names in the neighborhoods, in your districts, in your zones where you worked. And they trusted you because of that. And so, and I think it's because they didn't see you as much as a police officer anymore, just someone who was around to help them. And I think that breaks down barriers. I think that's some of the things we need to get back to. I think the profession, the community is guilty of this too, right? But the profession we've siloed ourselves away from the community for a while. And we cannot let politics and media tell us and tell the communities who we are. We have to tell that story. And so I think that's what the social connection is about. How do we start, traversing that narrative, and how do we have that conversation?
Awesome. How do we drive through a neighborhood where we're a part of it and not just drive to a destination, windows
That's
up? Yeah. Again, I'll try not to get on one of my sidebars, but that's, technology has been an amazing thing. And you mentioned it when you, at the beginning of the podcast, and we'll close it with this, that, when you hopped in a squad car, you had a radio, a gun, and really a mission. And now it was, I was carrying a wheel gun when I started, and then that was 1995. So it's not like I'm
not too
ancient.
long. Yeah.
I'm not ancient. We were one of the last departments in the state of Indiana to be carrying 357s. But we had no mobile computers in our cars. We had a map book and a portable radio, a mobile radio, and that was pretty much it. And so you had to listen, you had to know where everybody else was in your area, you had to know what kind of calls they were on. And even that seemed a little overwhelming. But my first FTO, it didn't matter how hot or how cold it was, the windows are going to be down. Why? So you can hear and see and interact with people as you're going through the neighborhoods. But as technology improved, and we got the mobile terminals in the car, and we have data connections, and now we have cell phones, and now we have cellular connected body cameras. We've got all the stuff that's in the car. It's a rolling office. It's everything that we need to do, and it allows us to be incredibly efficient. But at the same time, there's also been a digital, I call it the digital disconnection, where now, just like you were saying, we are not that same element that we used to be, and it takes effort, and we have to train and educate ourselves why that's not the way that that we're going to do our best policing, right? We're in the information business, and data collection systems can do amazing things for collecting data and analyzing data, but it's still people that are inputting the data that those systems are using. So
yeah, it's a good call out. The technology is very complex, and one thing at the company we're trying to figure out is how do we give the officer access to all this complex technology, but it happens in the background so they can focus on the human element of policing. And that's one we're obsessed about. And so, but to your point, we've forced cops to be mobile computer users, right? Like to only know and understand how technology actually gets them to an outcome versus focusing on how to solve the outcome or provide the outcome with the technology as a tool that can be in support of what they're doing. And so I think that's a shift that will come, as we get a little more mature in the technology space. But on TaserCon, I just want to highlight, we are going to be talking about some technology and how it connects into the human being. And I would say, if you follow Axon, you follow Taser, most people that are probably watching the podcast either at least have a Taser on their belt, and maybe likely an Axon body camera. But we'll be doing something very special that you're not going to want to miss. One of the biggest announcements the company has ever made will happen at TaserCon. And if you're a master instructor and you're recerting for 2023 or even 2024, come early. This master instructor will be connected to TaserCon, and again, something you absolutely don't want to miss.
Ooh, the teaser's out there, folks. The teaser is out there. Well, I'm excited. I will get the opportunity to be there, and I can say that I've never missed an Accelerate. I've been to all the Axon Accelerates, and those I've been to a lot of great training, but those conferences are done so well. So it's a lot like IACP when you come back from that. It's like it takes a couple days to like decompress because you got you've so much information, so much good stuff. But again, I love the way that you've got it set up, those three categories. I think for agencies that are looking for comprehensive programs, I think this is a great place to go. I know a lot of agencies have got pieces of the puzzle, but we're all still trying to figure out how to connect them and get them all into place. I'm really excited for this. Looking at your guest list, and for listeners of the show, we are going to have a few of the speakers from TaserCon are going to be on the podcast, so you can get some a preview for what you can expect at the conference. But nothing is going to replace the experience of that conference. So I can't wait to be there. I can't wait to see it, and I'm excited about the future of training. And so, thank you, sir, for taking your time to be with us today. I think I better shut up, or else it's going to be another hour.
Yeah, Pat, thanks again for having me on. We could spend time talking for hours about these things, and maybe we do that with a cocktail or a beer in our hand. But
oh yeah,
I do want to say,
talking.
Yeah, I do want to say I really appreciate you having me on. Thanks for your service to our country and to your community as a police officer and a police executive, and really appreciate our relationship and what you're helping to do out there with coaching as well.
Right on, and right back at you. I really appreciate that. I can say in my professional life, when you're really looking for partners, when you have ideas and concepts and and no R&D budgets, you rely on people in the private sector and the academic world to partner with and to help us make this profession even better than it is now. And so I appreciate everything that you've been doing. So that's a great transition. It's great that you were able to make a transition that you can still keep improving the profession for us. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Be safe out there.
All right, everybody. That's it for today. And that was a great episode. Thanks again. If you're in law enforcement, consider getting a coach, and do so by going to axoncoaching.com. Check us out and contact us today. Until our next episode, I'm 1042.